The explosion tore through the Lincoln, Nebraska mercantile at 12:30 on a sweltering July day in 1878, turning the afternoon shopping hour into a hellscape of fire, smoke, and collapsing timber. Victoria Jane Winters had been examining a bolt of blue calico when the boiler in the back storage room detonated, sending a shockwave through the building that knocked her off her feet and brought the ceiling down in a cascade of splintered wood and plaster dust. She had barely registered the sound before the weight of the world crashed down upon her, a massive beam pinning her legs and trapping her beneath a mountain of debris. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, stealing her breath and making her vision swim with black spots. She could taste blood and dust, could hear the screaming and the crackle of flames beginning to lick at the wreckage around her. Her hands scrabbled uselessly at the rough wood pressing down on her thighs, but it would not budge no matter how hard she pushed. The beam had to weigh hundreds of pounds, and she was well and truly stuck. Panic clawed at her throat as smoke began to fill her lungs, acrid and choking. Through the ringing in her ears and the chaos of voices, she heard heavy footsteps approaching at a run. Someone shouted something she could not make out over the roar of the growing fire. Then a figure dropped to his knees beside her, and she found herself looking up into the most striking pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a man in his late 20s with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair covered in dust, dressed in the worn denim and leather of a working cowboy. "Hold on, miss," he said, his voice steady despite the danger surrounding them. "I'm getting you out of here." Harrison Isaac Thornton did not wait for her response. He moved to where the beam lay across her legs, planted his boots wide, and gripped the charred wood with both hands. Victoria watched his face contort with effort as he lifted, muscles straining beneath his shirt, the cords of his neck standing out like rope. The beam shifted an inch, then two, then suddenly it was rising as Harrison hauled it upward with a strength that seemed almost superhuman. He held it high enough for her to pull her legs free, though white-hot agony shot through her right ankle as she moved. "Can you stand?" Harrison asked, letting the beam crash back down now that she was clear. Victoria tried and immediately crumpled, her injured ankle refusing to bear weight. Without hesitation, Harrison scooped her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his chest as he straightened. She instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck, clinging to him as he picked his way through the wreckage with swift, sure movements. Fire had caught the far wall now, sending waves of heat washing over them. Part of the roof groaned ominously overhead. Harrison moved faster, jumping over a fallen shelf and ducking beneath a sagging rafter. Victoria buried her face against his shoulder, squeezing her eyes shut against the smoke and the terror. She could feel the steady thud of his heartbeat against her cheek, could smell the clean scent of him beneath the ash and sweat. His arms held her securely, protectively, and despite everything, she felt strangely safe. Then they were bursting through what remained of the front entrance and into the blessed sunshine and fresh air. Harrison carried her across the street to where townspeople had gathered, finally setting her down gently on the wooden sidewalk in front of the barber shop. She immediately began coughing, her lungs burning as they tried to expel the smoke she had inhaled. "Someone get Doc Harrington," Harrison called out, kneeling beside her. His hand came to rest on her back, rubbing gentle circles as she struggled to catch her breath. "Easy now. You are safe. Just breathe slow and steady." Victoria nodded, focusing on pulling air into her lungs despite the way it made her chest ache. When the coughing fit finally subsided, she looked up at the man who had saved her life. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the strong line of his jaw beneath several days' worth of stubble, the concern etched across his features as he studied her. "Thank you," she managed to rasp out. "You saved my life." "Could not very well leave a lady to burn," Harrison said, and despite the gravity of the situation, there was a hint of warmth in his tone. "How are your legs? That beam came down pretty hard." "My ankle hurts something fierce," Victoria admitted, "but I think the beam mostly caught my skirts." "I was lucky." "We both were," Harrison said. "Another minute and that whole building would have come down." As if to punctuate his words, a tremendous crash echoed behind them. They both turned to see the mercantile's roof collapse inward, sending a fresh column of smoke and sparks skyward. The volunteer fire brigade had arrived and was working to contain the blaze, though it was clear the building itself was lost. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes as the reality of what had just happened settled over her. She had come within moments of dying in that inferno. "Hey now," Harrison said softly, drawing her attention back to him. "None of that. You are alive, and that is what matters." "I know," Victoria said, brushing at her eyes with the back of one soot-stained hand. "I just keep thinking about what would have happened if you had not been there." "But I was there," Harrison said firmly. "And I would do it again in a heartbeat." Something in the way he said it, in the intensity of his gaze, made Victoria's breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with the smoke. Before she could respond, Doc Harrington arrived, his medical bag in hand and his expression grave as he took in the scene. "Let me have a look at you, Miss Winters," the doctor said, crouching down beside her. Harrison moved back to give him room, but not far. He stayed close, watching as the doctor examined Victoria's ankle and checked her over for other injuries. The diagnosis was a badly sprained ankle, and some minor burns on her hands from trying to move the beam, along with smoke inhalation that would leave her coughing for a few days. All things considered, she had gotten off remarkably light. Doc Harrington wrapped her ankle and applied salve to her burns, all while muttering about what a miracle it was that anyone had made it out of that building alive. "You will need to stay off that foot for at least a week," the doctor instructed as he finished bandaging her ankle. "Keep it elevated and ice it regularly, and if the coughing gets worse or you develop a fever, you send for me immediately." "I will," Victoria promised. "Thank you, doctor." As Harrington packed up his bag and moved on to check other survivors, Victoria became aware of a new problem. She lived above the dress shop 3 buildings down, which meant climbing a flight of stairs on an ankle that would not bear weight. Her employer, Mrs. Patterson, had left that morning to visit her sister in Omaha and would not be back for another week. Victoria was effectively on her own. "Is there someone I can fetch for you?" Harrison asked, seeming to sense her distress. "Family, friends. My family is back in Pennsylvania," Victoria said. "I have only been in Lincoln for 6 months. I have acquaintances, but no one I would want to impose on for something like this." Harrison frowned, clearly troubled by this answer. "You cannot manage stairs with that ankle, and Doc said you need to keep it elevated. You need somewhere to stay and someone to look after you, at least for the next few days." "I will figure something out," Victoria said, though she had no idea what that something might be. The hotel would cost money she could barely afford, and she hated the thought of being a burden to anyone. "You could stay at my place," Harrison said, and then immediately seemed to realize how that sounded. Color rose in his cheeks beneath the layer of soot and dust. "I mean, it is not much, just a small house at the edge of town, but it has a spare room. My sister Sarah lives with me, so it would all be proper and above board. She is a fine cook and would be happy to help look after you while you heal." Victoria stared at him, taken aback by the offer. "I could not possibly impose like that. You have already done so much." "It is not an imposition," Harrison insisted. "Truth is, Sarah would have my hide if I let you struggle on your own after pulling you out of that wreckage. She is particular about such things. Please at least come for dinner and meet her. If you are not comfortable after that, we can make other arrangements." There was such earnestness in his expression, such genuine concern, that Victoria found herself nodding before she had really thought it through. "If you are certain your sister would not mind." "I am certain," Harrison said, and the smile that crossed his face transformed it entirely, chasing away the grimness and revealing a warmth that made Victoria's heart skip in her chest. "Let me go get my horse and wagon. I will be right back." He was true to his word, returning within minutes with a sturdy buckboard wagon pulled by a dappled gray mare. Harrison lifted Victoria as carefully as he had before, settling her on the wagon seat with her injured foot propped up on a folded blanket. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to set the mare in motion. They rode through Lincoln's dusty streets, past the courthouse and the railroad depot, heading toward the residential area on the eastern edge of town. Victoria had never been to this part of Lincoln before. The houses here were modest but well kept, most with small gardens and chicken coops in the yards. Harrison's place was a small clapboard house painted white with green trim, surrounded by a neat picket fence. A vegetable garden flourished in the side yard, and a few chickens pecked at the ground near a tidy coop. Before Harrison could even set the brake, the front door flew open and a young woman emerged. She looked to be in her early 20s, with the same dark hair as Harrison and warm brown eyes that widened as she took in the sight of her brother helping an injured, soot-covered woman down from the wagon. "Harrison Isaac Thornton. What on earth?" Sarah called out, hurrying down the porch steps. "We heard the explosion clear out here. Are you hurt?" "I am fine, Sarah," Harrison assured her, once again lifting Victoria into his arms. "But Miss Winters here was caught in the collapse. She has a badly sprained ankle and needs a place to stay while she heals. I told her we had a spare room." Sarah's expression shifted immediately from concern to determination. "Of course she does. Bring her inside and put her in the guest room. I will get water heating for a bath and see about finding her some clean clothes." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Sarah proved to be as capable and kind as her brother, helping Victoria out of her ruined dress and into a hip bath filled with wonderfully warm water, washing the soot and ash from her hair with gentle hands. She provided a clean nightgown and wrapper, chattering all the while about how fortunate it was that Victoria and Harrison were of a similar height, making the borrowed clothes fit reasonably well. Once Victoria was clean and dressed, Sarah settled her in the guest room, which was small but cheerful, with lace curtains at the window and a colorful quilt on the bed. She propped Victoria's foot on pillows and brought her a cup of chamomile tea with honey to soothe her raw throat. "You just rest now," Sarah said, tucking the quilt around Victoria's legs. "I am making chicken stew for supper, and I will bring you a bowl once it is ready. If you need anything at all, you just call out." "Thank you," Victoria said, overwhelmed by the kindness these strangers were showing her. "Both of you have been so generous. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "Nonsense," Sarah said firmly. "Harrison did what any decent man would do, and I am doing what any decent woman would do. That is just how neighbors behave out here. Now rest." Victoria tried to rest, but her mind kept replaying the events of the afternoon. The explosion, the terror of being trapped, the moment Harrison had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not had time to form. The way he had looked at her, the gentleness of his hands despite his obvious strength, the warmth in his voice. She barely knew this man, yet he had risked his life for her without hesitation, and then opened his home to her. It was the kind of thing you heard about in stories, not something that actually happened in real life. She must have dozed off despite her racing thoughts, because the next thing she knew, Sarah was gently shaking her shoulder, saying supper was ready. Harrison appeared in the doorway, looking considerably cleaner than the last time she had seen him, his hair still damp from washing and a fresh shirt on his broad frame. "I can bring you a tray in here if you would prefer," Sarah offered, "but Harrison thought you might like some company, and the table is just in the next room." "I would like that very much," Victoria said. The truth was, she did not want to be alone with her thoughts right now. The company of these kind people was exactly what she needed. Harrison carried her to the dining table and settled her in a chair, making sure her foot stayed elevated on a second chair pulled up close. The meal was simple but delicious, the chicken stew rich and savory, accompanied by fresh bread and butter. As they ate, Sarah kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Victoria about herself and sharing stories about life in Lincoln. Victoria learned that Harrison and Sarah had moved to Nebraska from Missouri 5 years ago, after their parents died in a cholera outbreak. Harrison worked as a ranch hand at the Double Bar K Ranch just west of town, one of the largest cattle operations in the region. He was saving up to buy his own land someday, a small spread where he could raise horses. Sarah worked as a seamstress, taking in mending and making dresses for the local ladies. Between the two of them, they managed to make a comfortable life. In turn, Victoria told them about growing up in Philadelphia, the youngest daughter of a shopkeeper. She had come west seeking adventure and independence, taking a position as assistant to Mrs. Patterson, who ran the finest dress shop in Lincoln. She loved the work and the freedom of being on her own, though she sometimes missed her family fiercely. "Philadelphia," Harrison said, a hint of teasing in his voice. "That is about as far from Nebraska as you can get and still be in the same country. What made a city girl like you want to come all the way out here?" "I wanted to see what else the world had to offer," Victoria said. "Philadelphia is wonderful, but it is all I had ever known. I wanted to make my own way, have my own adventures. My parents thought I was mad, but they eventually gave me their blessing." "I would say you have certainly had an adventure today," Sarah said wryly, "though perhaps not the kind you were hoping for." Victoria laughed, which made her cough, but it felt good to laugh nonetheless. "No, definitely not what I had in mind. But I met you too, so perhaps it was meant to be." Something flickered in Harrison's eyes at that, something warm and intent that made Victoria's pulse quicken. They held each other's gaze for a long moment before Sarah cleared her throat pointedly, breaking the spell. After supper, Harrison carried Victoria back to the guest room, and Sarah came in shortly after with a cool cloth for her forehead and another cup of tea. They bid her good night, leaving the door cracked open in case she needed anything. Victoria lay in the darkness, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling around her, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Victoria spent most of her time in bed with her foot elevated, though she did her best to help where she could, mending clothes Sarah brought her and helping to snap beans for canning. Sarah proved to be delightful company, full of wit and stories, and she clearly adored her older brother, though she was not above teasing him mercilessly. Harrison left early each morning for the ranch, but he always came home for the midday meal, checking on Victoria and asking how she was feeling. In the evenings, he would carry her to the porch so she could sit in the cool air and watch the sunset. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations flowing as easily as water. Victoria found herself looking forward to those evening talks more than anything else, drawn to Harrison's quiet strength and dry humor, the way he really listened when she spoke, the occasional glimpse of vulnerability beneath his steady exterior. On the fourth day after the explosion, Victoria woke to find her ankle much improved. The swelling had gone down considerably, and she could put some weight on it without too much pain. She was determined to start pulling her own weight around the house, so she hobbled to the kitchen to help Sarah with breakfast. "You should be resting," Sarah scolded when she found Victoria peeling potatoes at the table, but there was no real heat in her words. "I have been resting for days," Victoria protested. "I feel like I am going to go mad if I have to spend another minute in that bed, lovely as it is. Please let me help. I promise to sit while I work." Sarah relented, and they spent the morning working side by side, preparing a pot roast for supper and baking bread. It felt good to be useful, to contribute something after days of being waited on. When Harrison came home at noon, his face lit up at the sight of Victoria up and about. "Look at you," he said, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. "You are looking more like yourself." "I feel much better," Victoria said, "though I still cannot manage too much walking. This ankle is stubborn." "Do not push it," Harrison cautioned. "You will heal faster if you give it proper time." They ate lunch together, and afterward, Harrison surprised Victoria by asking if she would like to take a short walk with him, just to the end of the street and back. He offered his arm for support, and she took it gratefully, leaning on him as they made their slow way down the dusty road. It was a beautiful September afternoon, the oppressive heat of summer finally beginning to break. A light breeze rustled through the cottonwood trees lining the street, and the sky overhead was a brilliant, cloudless blue. They walked in comfortable silence for a while before Harrison spoke. "I have been meaning to ask," he said. "What will you do now? About work, I mean." With the mercantile destroyed and Mrs. Patterson still away, Victoria had been trying not to think about that particular problem. "I suppose I will have to find new employment. Mrs. Patterson will rebuild eventually, I am sure, but that could take months. I cannot go without wages that long." "What kind of work are you looking for?" Harrison asked. "Anything respectable," Victoria said. "I can sew, I can keep books, I am fairly good with numbers. I suppose I will ask around town and see if anyone is hiring." Harrison was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Sarah has been saying for months that she has more work than she can handle on her own. She keeps talking about bringing on an apprentice or partner, someone to help with the sewing. If you are interested, I am sure she would be glad to have you. The pay might not be as good as what Mrs. Patterson offered, at least at first, but it would be steady work." Victoria felt a surge of hope. "Do you really think she would consider me? I would love to work with Sarah. She has been so kind." "I know she would," Harrison said with certainty. "I will talk to her tonight if you would like." "I would like that very much," Victoria said. "Thank you, Harrison, for everything. I do not know what I would have done without you and Sarah these past few days." Harrison stopped walking and turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. "Victoria, I need you to know something. That day at the mercantile, when I saw you trapped under that beam, something in me just knew I had to get you out. Not because it was the right thing to do, though it was, but because the thought of anything happening to you was unbearable. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I feel like I have known you much longer, like I was meant to find you that day." Victoria's heart was racing now, her breath coming short. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have tried to tell myself it is just gratitude, that I am confused because you saved my life, but it is more than that. When I am with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Harrison reached up and gently cupped her face in his calloused hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I am going to court you proper," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you will let me, I want to do this right." "I would like that," Victoria said, and then Harrison was kissing her, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was a kiss that tasted of new beginnings, of second chances, of fate and faith intertwining. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria was smiling so wide her face hurt. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they told Sarah the news, she squealed with delight and immediately began planning a celebratory supper. True to Harrison's word, Sarah offered Victoria a partnership in her sewing business that very evening, and Victoria accepted with gratitude and excitement. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Victoria's life. She moved into a small room above the seamstress shop that Sarah had been using for storage, turning it into a cozy living space. She and Sarah worked side by side during the day, taking in more orders than ever before as word spread about the quality of their work. In the evenings, Harrison would call on Victoria, and they would take walks together or sit on the shop's porch, talking and laughing and falling more deeply in love with each passing day. Harrison was a steady presence in her life, reliable and true. He brought her wildflowers picked from the prairie and took her on picnics by the creek. He introduced her to his friends from the ranch and taught her to ride horseback, holding her steady in the saddle until she found her confidence. He shared his dreams of owning land and raising horses, and she shared her hopes of one day expanding the sewing business into a full-dress shop of their own. 3 months after the explosion that had brought them together, Harrison asked Victoria to marry him. They were sitting by the creek, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, when he pulled a simple gold band from his pocket and took her hand in his. "Victoria Jane Winters," he said, his voice shaking slightly with nerves and joy, "you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You came into my life in fire and chaos, and you have filled it with light and laughter ever since. I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, she said, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in the small church on Main Street on a crisp November morning, with Sarah as maid of honor and Harrison's friend Jack from the ranch standing up as best man. Victoria wore a dress she and Sarah had sewn together, cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Harrison wore his best suit, his hair carefully combed and his boots polished to a shine. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Harrison kissed her in front of God and everyone, Victoria felt like her heart might burst with happiness. They held the reception at the ranch where Harrison worked, the owner having graciously offered his barn for the occasion. There was music and dancing and more food than seemed possible, contributed by what felt like half the town. People came up to Victoria all night to welcome her to the community and to share their own stories of the day of the explosion. How Harrison had gone back into the burning building 3 more times after carrying her out, helping 2 more people escape before the roof finally came down. She had known he was brave, but hearing the full extent of his heroism that day made her love him even more fiercely. As the evening wore on and the stars came out overhead, Harrison swept Victoria into his arms and carried her away from the party, both of them laughing as their friends called out teasing remarks. He had spent the past week fixing up the small house he had been renting, adding fresh paint and new curtains and a rocking chair he had built himself for the front porch. It was not much, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. That night, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Victoria traced her fingers over the scar on Harrison's forearm where a burning timber had caught him during the rescue. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "Not anymore," Harrison said, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. "It is just a reminder of the best day of my life." "The day of the explosion?" Victoria asked with a laugh. "Most people would not call that a good day." "It was the day I found you," Harrison said simply. "The day my life changed forever. I would go through it again in a heartbeat if it meant ending up right here, right now, with you as my wife." Victoria kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into that kiss. Whatever had led her to Lincoln, whatever series of chance and fate and providence had put her in that mercantile on that particular day, she was grateful for all of it, because it had led her to this man, this life, this love that felt like coming home. The years that followed were full and rich. Harrison saved enough to buy a small parcel of land just outside town, where he built a larger house with his own hands, Victoria working alongside him whenever she could. They started raising horses just as Harrison had always dreamed, and his reputation for training quality animals spread throughout the county. Victoria and Sarah expanded their sewing business into a full dress shop, which became the most popular establishment of its kind in Lincoln. 3 years into their marriage, Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Henry, after Harrison's father. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's quick smile, and Harrison took to fatherhood like he had been born for it. 2 years later came a daughter, Violet, with dark curls and a stubborn streak a mile wide. And 3 years after that, another son, Hugo, who was quiet and thoughtful and gentle. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when money was tight and the work was endless. But through it all, Harrison and Victoria faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each challenge they overcame. On the 20th anniversary of the day they met, Harrison took Victoria back to the spot where the mercantile had stood. It had been rebuilt years ago, bigger and better than before, but they both remembered exactly where the building had been when it exploded. They stood there hand in hand, older now, marked by time and life and love. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not gone into town that day?" Harrison asked. "If I had stayed at the ranch instead?" "No," Victoria said firmly, "because you did come into town, you did save me, and you have been saving me ever since in 100 different ways." She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face, now lined with age but still as dear to her as it had been that first day. "You are my miracle, Harrison Thornton, then and now and always." Harrison pulled her close, holding her tight against his chest just as he had when he carried her from the rubble all those years ago. "And you are mine," he whispered against her hair. "My brave, beautiful Victoria, the love of my life." They stood there together as the sun set over Lincoln, Nebraska, the town that had witnessed their beginning and all the days since. Around them, the world moved on, busy and bustling and full of life. But in that moment, they were the only two people who existed, bound together by fate and choice and a love that had been forged in fire and tempered by time. Their children grew up strong and healthy, each finding their own path in the world. Henry took over the horse breeding operation, expanding it into one of the most successful ranches in the state. Violet became a teacher, fierce and passionate about education for all children. Hugo followed in his Aunt Sarah's footsteps, becoming a skilled tailor with a shop in Omaha. As Harrison and Victoria aged, they spent more time on the porch of their home, watching the horses graze in the pasture and the grandchildren play in the yard. Sarah, who never married but lived a full and joyful life, often joined them, and they would reminisce about the old days, about the Lincoln they had known when they were young. On a warm evening in June of 1918, 40 years after the day they met, Harrison and Victoria sat together in the rocking chairs he had built so long ago. The sun was setting in its familiar blaze of color, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, both sets marked with the spots and wrinkles of age but still fitting together as perfectly as they always had. "You have any regrets?" Victoria asked, her voice still strong despite her 70 years. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Harrison thought about it for a long moment, then shook his head. "Not a single one," he said. "Well, maybe I wish I had kissed you sooner that first week, instead of waiting so long to tell you how I felt." Victoria laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been when she was 20. "You told me after 4 days. That is hardly a long time." "4 days too long," Harrison insisted, and he leaned over to kiss her, slow and sweet and tender. When they pulled apart, Victoria rested her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into night. The life they had built together surrounded them, solid and real and beautiful. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and soon to be 2 great-grandchildren. A successful business, a thriving ranch, a community that loved and respected them. But more than any of that, they had each other, and that had always been the greatest blessing of all. "I love you," Victoria whispered as the first stars began to appear overhead. "I love you too," Harrison whispered back. "From that very first moment and every moment since." They stayed there together as night fell completely, 2 hearts beating as one, their love story written in the stars above and the earth beneath their feet. A story that had begun in fire and desperation, in a moment of courage and fate, and had grown into something beautiful and enduring. A love that had weathered 40 years and would last beyond their final breaths, living on in the children and grandchildren who carried their names and their legacy forward. Harrison and Victoria Thornton had found each other in the rubble of disaster and had built a life that was anything but ruined. They had loved fiercely and completely, had worked hard and played harder, had created a home filled with laughter and warmth and belonging. And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, they knew with absolute certainty that they would do it all over again, exactly the same way, because the journey had led them to this moment, this life, this love. And that, they both agreed, was the greatest gift of all. Years continued to pass with the gentle inevitability of seasons changing. Harrison and Victoria remained devoted to each other, their bond only strengthening as they moved through their 70s and into their 80s. They had been blessed with remarkable health and vigor, still tending their garden together and taking slow walks around their property each evening when weather permitted. In 1928, the 50th anniversary of their meeting, their family threw them a grand celebration at the ranch. All 3 children came home, bringing their families with them. The house and yard filled with the sound of children laughing and playing, just as it had for decades. A banner hung over the porch proclaiming 50 years of love, and tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by daughters-in-law and granddaughters. As the party reached its height, Henry called for everyone's attention. "I want to say something about my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "I have spent my whole life watching them love each other, and I have never once seen that love falter. They have shown me what it means to be truly committed to another person, to face life's challenges together, to build something that lasts. Dad, you taught me to be strong but gentle, to work hard and to value what matters most. Mom, you taught me that courage comes in many forms, that kindness is never wasted, and that love is always worth fighting for. Thank you both for everything." Victoria wiped tears from her eyes as their children and grandchildren echoed Henry's sentiments, each sharing their own memories and gratitude. Harrison held her hand tightly, his own eyes suspiciously bright, as he looked around at the family they had created together. That night, after everyone had gone home or retired to guest rooms, Harrison and Victoria sat once more on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool spring air. The moon was full and bright overhead, casting silver shadows across the land. 50 years, Victoria marveled. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that you pulled me out of that wreckage. Other times it feels like I have known you my entire life. Both are true in their own way, Harrison said. The years have gone by in a heartbeat, but they have also been full enough for several lifetimes. Victoria shifted closer to him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side just as he had done thousands of times before. They sat in peaceful silence, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass. "When my time comes," Victoria said quietly, "I want you to know that every day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, even the days when we fought or struggled or did not know how we would make ends meet. Every single day has been worth it because I got to spend it with you." "Do not talk like that," Harrison said, though his voice was gentle. "We have years yet." "Maybe," Victoria said, "but I want you to know anyway, and I want you to promise me something." "Anything," Harrison said. "Promise me that when I am gone, you will not spend your days grieving. Remember me with joy, celebrate the life we built, and know that I will be waiting for you. And if you should go first, know that I will do the same. This love we have, it does not end just because we are separated for a little while." Harrison tightened his arm around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I promise," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "though I will still miss you something terrible." "And I will miss you," Victoria said, "but missing someone is just love with nowhere to go. And our love has always found a way." They sat together until late into the night, wrapped in blankets and memories and the enduring warmth of a love that had survived 5 decades. When they finally went inside to bed, they held each other close, grateful for another day, another night, another moment together. Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold December morning in 1932, 3 months shy of his 83rd birthday. Victoria woke to find him still and quiet beside her, his face peaceful, one hand still reaching toward her across the pillow. She held him and wept, but even in her grief, she felt a strange sense of peace. He had lived a full life, had loved and been loved beyond measure, and had left this world in his own bed surrounded by the evidence of that love. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the state of Nebraska. Ranchers and seamstresses, old friends and new, all came to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, his kindness, and his unwavering devotion to his family. Victoria stood strong throughout it all, supported by her children and grandchildren, drawing on the same courage that had seen her through every challenge she had ever faced. In the months that followed, Victoria discovered that grief and joy could coexist in strange and unexpected ways. She missed Harrison with an ache that never fully went away, but she also found comfort in memories, in the family he had given her, in the legacy they had built together. She spent her days working in her garden, playing with great-grandchildren, and sitting on the porch in the evening, telling stories about Harrison to anyone who would listen. "Tell us about the fire again, Grandma," her great-granddaughter Emma would beg, and Victoria would smile and begin the story once more, never tiring of recounting how Harrison had lifted that beam and carried her to safety, how that single act of courage had changed both their lives forever. Victoria lived for another 8 years after Harrison's death, years filled with love and laughter despite the empty space beside her. She saw 3 more great-grandchildren born and held each one with wonder, marveling at how love could multiply and expand, creating new branches on an ever-growing tree. On a sunny morning in July of 1940, Exactly 62 years after the day she and Harrison had met, Victoria Jane Thornton passed away quietly in her sleep, a smile on her face, and a letter from Harrison clutched in her hand. He had written it to her on their 40th anniversary, a love letter full of promises and memories and dreams for the future. She had kept it in her bedside table and read it often in the years since his death, finding comfort in his words. They buried her next to Harrison in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Lincoln, under a spreading oak tree that provided shade in summer and shelter in winter. The headstone was simple but elegant, bearing both their names and a single inscription: united in life, united in eternity. At the funeral, Henry stood to speak on behalf of the family. "My parents had a love story that began in tragedy and became something beautiful," he said, his voice strong despite his tears. "They showed all of us what it means to truly love someone, to stand by them through everything life throws at you, to build something lasting and real. They are together again now, and I have no doubt that wherever they are, my father is holding my mother's hand just like he did every day of their lives together." The family stayed at the graveside long after the service ended, sharing stories and memories, laughing through their tears at the funny moments and the sweet ones. And as the sun set over the Nebraska prairie, painting the sky in those familiar shades of amber and rose, it seemed almost as if Harrison and Victoria were there with them, holding each other close and smiling down on the family they had created, the legacy they had left behind. The story of the cowboy who lifted a beam and carried a woman from the rubble became the stuff of family legend, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren told it to their children, who told it to their children, each retelling keeping the memory alive. The simple act of courage that had brought Harrison and Victoria together had rippled outward, touching countless lives and creating a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. And so their story came to an end, but also to a beginning, because love like theirs never truly dies. It lives on in the hearts of those who knew them, in the children who carry their blood and their names, in the values they instilled and the example they set. Harrison and Victoria Thornton had found each other in fire and chaos, had built a life together from rubble and ash, and had created something beautiful and enduring that would last for generations to come. Their love story was complete, with no loose ends, no questions left unanswered. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And in the end, that was all anyone could hope for, all anyone could ask. They had found their happily ever after, not in some distant fairy tale ending, but in the everyday moments of a life well lived, in the simple joy of waking up beside the person you love, in the knowledge that you had been seen and known and cherished by another soul. And when the last person who had known them personally finally passed away, their story lived on in written records and family trees, in the ranch that still bore the Thornton name, in the descendants who carried their legacy forward. The love between a cowboy and the woman he saved from the rubble had become immortal, a testament to the power of courage, fate, and the enduring strength of the human heart.